Hi, I'm Natalia.
And I'm Paige.
And for this assignment, what did we read, Paige?
We read What Great Teachers Do Differently, 17 Things That Matter Most.
And what did we think about it? What were your honest thoughts?
I agreed with most of it. There were a couple things I disagreed with and that I wouldn't implement in my classroom, but for the most part, it was super, super helpful.
I thought so too. So in the following video, we broke the 17 things down into 3 major categories, which you'll see in the slideshow that follows. And we gave you a brief assignment. We hope you find it helpful and that it impacts your teaching. In the following slides, we have broken down Whitaker's 17 Things That Matter Most and regrouped them into 3 major categories. One is the great teacher's interaction with themselves. The second is the great teacher's interaction with their students. And the third is the great teacher's interaction with the system. Throughout this video, your task will be to identify 2 concepts that you believe are of highest importance and that you would like to implement in your own teaching, and then also identify 1 concept that you believe is the least important. Be prepared to defend your choices. This should be brought to class on Thursday as a list of concepts with 3 to 5 sentence defenses for each.
Great teachers understand themselves and are constantly seeking to improve their own pedagogy. They are self-aware enough to see their flaws and know that they are the variable that they can control in the classroom, leading to high expectations for themselves and consistency in their behavior. When they say something to their students, they have the integrity to follow through. They are intentional with what they say and do in the classroom. Nothing is by accident. They commit to seeing the positive in each situation, recognizing that teaching in itself is a privilege. Great teachers believe the best in their students and the community in which they serve, which drives all the decisions that they make. So Natalia, what is your big takeaway from this section of the book?
I would say the big takeaway for me was that 1 concept that is you are the variable. I think the big part of that is the whole idea that we are really the only people we can control within the classroom, and so we need to take responsibility for our actions, which means what the students learn and how they behave for the most part is a reflection of our teaching and the way we behave. And that's not always true. There are some variables that are completely out of our control, like the things that the students are bringing in from home and things like that. But for the most part, I need to set high expectations for myself as well as high expectations for my students, but I can't set higher expectations for my students than I do for myself. And so in that, I have high self-awareness, I'm always looking to grow, and I control myself very well so that I am able to see that reflected in my students. What about you?
I totally agree with everything you said. Walking into a classroom as a teacher, we can't control what students walk in the room or what the school district is like or what the community is like, but what we can control is our teaching strategies. So we need to be very careful about creating classroom situations where we're in control and creating situations that we want in order to avoid those negative situations.
That makes sense. This is also a good time to say that when you see the slides, if you need to hit pause, please do that because the principles we are talking about are the ones that we are including on the slides. Happy watching! The second large concept we would like to talk about is how great teachers interact with their students. Effective teachers have deep empathy for students and commit to multicultural understandings of their classroom populations. They seek to see the world as their students do and let that perspective change their pedagogy. Though cultural sensitivity varies in every classroom, meaning that every student brings something different to the table, every great teacher sets clear expectations and follows through from the beginning of the school year, regardless of how the classroom looks or what its population is made up of. They ignore small infractions and focus on keeping misbehavior from happening again in the future, rather than focusing on punishing past offenses. They seek to create a positive classroom environment and understand the power of praise. They praise often and they praise well. Because they do this, they are consistently repairing damage before it is irreversible and maintain genuine relationships and student rapport. This teacher understands that behavior is often fueled by emotion, and therefore their treatment of students has impact. Great teachers treat all students as though they are good students, regardless of student track record. Paige, what would you say was your biggest takeaway from this whole umbrella of a great teacher's interactions with their students?
Yeah, I would say I have two main takeaways from this section. The first one is acting on the assumption that all of your students are good. When you act on the assumption that all of your students are bad, you've not only just offended all the students who were behaving correctly because you've told them that they were behaving poorly, but you've also not done anything effective to change that bad behavior that you're trying to avoid. So it's really just not a good strategy altogether. And the second big takeaway is repairing damage in your relationship with the student before it's irreversible. So there is some damage that can be done in that student-teacher relationship that is irreversible, and you want to get to that damage before it gets to that point. So just being really proactive to make sure that you're reinforcing that relationship with the student.
Because irreversible damage usually happens over like a long period of time, which means that if it's become irreversible, a teacher did not address like the little things right away. That makes sense. And the book talks about those things being like irreversible damage happening when teachers like use sarcasm or insults or shaming, or like get into arguments with students in front of other students, things like that. I think my biggest takeaway was setting high expectations at the very beginning of the year and following through all the way. And he makes a really good point about this not meaning anything about like don't smile till Thanksgiving or whatever that saying is, but instead just being a teacher of your word. So when you say something, you mean it, you follow through, and that way you don't ever have to be the teacher who's screaming, "I've told you this a dozen times, like why haven't you followed through?" Because honestly, if they're not following through after a dozen times, it probably means you didn't follow through the first time, which like that makes perfect sense to me, I think. The other thing was that good teachers praise often and they praise well. A lot of teachers say that they don't praise because either they don't have time or because their words will lose their meaning, or if they praise, people will want to stop like trying to earn, I don't know, positive affirmation. Yeah. And the book completely contradicts that. It says if you praise well, if you praise often, and you do it like an efficient and like correct way in which your praise is genuine and clean and like private, all of that, then your students will want to continue behaving well. And we just think those things are powerful. So I think that's my takeaway.
Yes. Now that we've discussed great teachers' interactions with themselves and with their students, it is important to understand how the great teacher interacts with the larger system, specifically their colleagues, their superiors, and the state. These educators remember that it is people, not programs, that determine the value of the school. Because this is true, they do not put their faith in a system or a policy, but rather in the effectiveness of educators, remembering that a program is only as good as its participants. Great teachers set high expectations for their colleagues and do not join in on negative conversation or complaining. Beyond the school building environment, great teachers understand the appropriate place of standardized testing in the classroom, not allowing standardized testing to take over the classroom. They focus on the real issues of learning rather than whether or not their students will get good grades on their standardized tests. Natalia, what did you think from this section of teachers' relationship with their colleagues, with their superiors, and with the state?
Well, first of all, I'm terrified to enter teacher's lounge now, and I did not realize that that's something I would be so scared of. But in all seriousness, the book did make it, or Whitaker, I guess, not the book, did make it fairly clear that negative peer interactions at the teacher level are super dangerous, really toxic, like, and can very much affect the school environment. And so I appreciated the point that he made about setting a high standard for yourself in your interactions with colleagues. And that doesn't necessarily mean avoiding the teacher's lounge, but it means when you enter the teacher's lounge or you enter the hallway in between periods, that you're not complaining, that you're not like griping on students or gossiping about students, but that you're setting the standard high in your speech and ultimately as believers, like in our hearts and in the way that we interact with students. And that's not a point that he made, but a point that I think is important for us, especially if we're going to be working in public school. And the second thing I thought was important was the focus on the fact that people make programs great, programs don't make schools great. So like a program is only as good as the people within it. So ultimately you could have a really great program, but if you have bad teachers within it, the program's gonna fail. And if you have a bad program with good teachers, I don't know, maybe it would be good, I guess. But I guess the point is more just that our focus needs to be on each other as colleagues, as a system, and making each other better rather than throwing blanket programs at everybody. What about you, Paige?
Yeah, I actually really took a lot away from him talking about the standardized testing. Standardized testing is our reality in the current education system. It's just something that we're going to have to do. So we need to stop wasting time arguing over whether or not we should have it or we shouldn't have it, because that's not really a productive conversation at the teacher level. But rather, we should figure out the best ways to make sure that standardized testing has its appropriate place in the classroom, and you're placing an appropriate amount of emphasis on getting those scores versus teaching what you think the students need to know.
That makes perfect sense. Well, hey, please make sure that you have taken notes so far, and we're just going to wrap up with a quick conclusion, and we will see you in class. Whitaker concludes his book by saying, "All of the behaviors we have described in this book lead to this: treating everyone with respect and dignity, always taking a positive approach, always modeling how to treat others, understanding that what matters is people, not programs, making every decision based on the best people. Each of these behaviors helps create an environment where it is cool to care. If two people both make every decision on what is best for students, even if they don't agree, they will both be right."
At the end of the day, it is important to remember that every teacher has an impact, but great teachers make a difference.